Greetings, I'm Phaedra Cress, Executive Editor with the Aesthetic Surgery Journal, and I'm here today with David Crotty from Oxford University Press, who is the Editorial Director of Journals Policy. David, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for talking to me.
We're launching a new initiative. It's called the ASJ Open Access Video Series, and we're planning to talk with all of our readers and subscribers a lot more about open access in terms of how it affects the work that we do in scholarly publishing. Open access is a changing and often confusing landscape. The demand for free and open data is not a new concept, and it began about 15 to 16 years ago. At first, publishers had a hard time embracing open access, but they realized, like many of us do, that open access isn't going away, and there are many benefits related to it. Some open access journals offer free trials, whereas others begin with an article processing fee as the journal takes shape. There's a lot of different variabilities in pricing across the spectrum of science, technology, and medicine, and other humanities and social sciences in terms of the pricing. So how do open access journals offer free content, but also stay in the black? These are some of the questions that we'll explore in this series. Some associate open access with predatory publishing, and David, I know that we've talked a little bit about this. We'd love to get your insights because open access is not synonymous with predatory publishing, although there's a lot of details here. Could you start by commenting on that piece for us?
Predatory well, I think I would describe predatory publishing as an unintended consequence of the gold open access business model. It has happened, it is problematic, but it hasn't sort of taken away from the many good things that open access is able to offer. I struggle a little bit with myself of the idea that, so to define it, this idea of predatory publishing is essentially people will open a publishing house with 250 journals run out of someone's apartment. You've never heard of them before. They have a name that probably sounds like a publisher or sounds like an existing set of journals. They solicit people like crazy by email. You submit a paper to them. It's instantly accepted. No peer review is performed. And then they charge you a fee to publish it. And so there's some debate over whether predatory is the right word. Deceptive is probably a better word because they are essentially promising to do something that they are not doing. The gold open access model is particularly susceptible to this, where the author is paying an APC fee to publish their paper. As a former researcher, I struggle with the idea that I would ever submit a paper to a journal that I don't read. And then people ask me, how do I avoid? As an author, how do I avoid predatory publishers? And the answer is submit your papers to the journals that you read. If you're going to go submit a paper to that journal, go see what they publish that's relevant to you in your field. And it's a mix of things. I mean, some of it is some percentage of it is people get fooled. They don't realize this is a real journal. A lot of these journals will list a bunch of reputable scientists on their editorial board. These scientists are always surprised to learn that there was one that listed Charles Darwin, Nikola Tesla, and Jim Watson on being on their editorial board, which I particularly liked. But I think there is a level also of scholars who are taking advantage of the system. So there are a lot of places in the world where for career advancement, you just have to publish in an international journal, meaning a journal that is not published within this country. And no one actually checks up on that journal. No one checks on the quality of the research. So if you're, there have been studies that show a large percentage of what gets published in predatory journals is from parts of Asia, parts of Africa.
Sure.
And so if you're a researcher there and your choice is, I could submit a paper to a reputable journal, go through 6 months to a year of very hard peer review, maybe get accepted, yes, maybe get accepted, maybe not get accepted, or I can send $100 to these people, have it accepted tomorrow, and it counts the same towards my career, then the decision's fairly obvious.
Sure.
So it's part of the problem is poor oversight on the incentives and in some areas of academia for career advancement. there are a couple of different ways that people are trying to address this. Some with these white lists or black lists. One of the major funders in India has a list of, I think, 38,000 journals. If you want a paper to count towards career advancement, you can only publish it in one of these journals. This is from a whitelist, and the problem is that there are still some predatory journals. It's hard to police, and some of these journals will sort of buy a reputable journal and turn it into one of these things. There are blacklists. Don't publish a journal that's on this blacklist. There are some moves in ASP who do work with a lot of international, particularly in the Global South, publishing has put together a set of badges for journals of here are things you have to do to be reputable, and a journal will have these in ASP sponsored badges that say yes, we do this.
Affirming their legitimate.
Yes, they have to go through a review within ASP to say yes, we actually do this. And then there's some other efforts like that, these sort of good housekeeping seal of approval of we will monitor whether the journal actually does peer review, and we'll see if those catch on. Because I think just the idea of if you wanted to count towards your career, then you have to publish in a journal that meets these standards. I'll take care of that.
Sure. So shifting gears, let's take a step back. Tell us broadly about your work and experience in open access. You mentioned you're a prior researcher. What has your experience been at Oxford with launching and maintaining open access journals, and what do the aesthetic surgeons that are reading ASJ need to know?
Well, I mean, open access I think is a really interesting subject. It's we're probably about 15 years into what I think of as the modern open access movement. It started around the year 2000. A group of researchers said, make everything freely available in your journals after 6 months or we will not submit to them. They put out a petition, 35,000 scientists signed it. It was really almost a very not even veiled extortion threat, and then no one sort of followed through on the promise with that. But it did sort of get a lot of movement going and started the Public Library of Science and other groups like that.
NIH, I think,
yes,
also
got involved as well.
Exactly.
So it's reaching this level of maturity, I think, open access. It's really gone from this a social movement to really just one of the ways we do business. Right now, it's the quantity of research that gets published has increased enormously, while library budgets have remained flat, if not declining. So it's almost impossible to start a new subscription journal and get a library to buy it because they simply don't have any more money. There was a point where they could drop some small core journals and free up some money. All that low-hanging fruit is basically gone at this point, and so many journals are tied up in these big packages from the large publishers that even if they drop a journal, they don't see any cost savings. So it's really hard to start a new subscription-based journal. So what open access has done is let us start serving needs of the community, that a new community, a new type of research needs a journal, or an existing journal has reached a point where it has such high standards that it's a society is shutting out a lot of its members because the journal is simply too crowded to get to a lot of members can't publish in it. So it lets us serve those needs without further burdening the library. So it's been really helpful there. But as a whole, I think open access is at something of a crossroads because it has reached this level of maturity and acceptance across all of scholarly publishing. Pretty much every publisher on earth has said, the community is asking for this, we will provide. We will give you fully open access journals, hybrid open access journals, green open access. Yes, right. Yes, so hybrid means it's a subscription journal, but authors are given the choice if they want to make their individual article open access. And what's happened is we have enough experience with it now that I think we know how it works, basically. I think one of the disappointments that the original advocates have had is that it hasn't produced this magical cost savings that they predicted. We're going to shift everything to open access and magically everything will be cheaper. What it's really done in a lot of ways is just shift that cost burden from the consumer, broadly from the consumer, onto the producer of the literature. So a lot of the benefits have become very evident. Some of the drawbacks have become evident. And so where we are now is this point where we're seeing continued growth in the gold and green open access models that have been the sort of standards for this, we're seeing a lot of new experimentation with different models. And in particular, I think there's a recognition now that there's no one perfect model of open access, and different models work really well for different fields. A field that's really well funded needs a different model than a field that, of say, history or poetry, where there's no NIH to provide funds for these sorts of things.
You are an author, a cook, if you will, in the scholarly kitchen.
We prefer the term chef.
Chef, you're a chef in the scholarly kitchen. And you wrote an article called, "Is it true that most open access journals do not charge an APC? Sort of, it depends." And combined with that and the statistic from the DOAJ, Directory of Open Access Journals, they said that 60% of fully gold open access journals don't charge APCs. What was the result of your article and your research when you dug a little deeper into this?
So the difference is whether you're looking on a title level or an article level. So the majority of open access journals don't charge any fees. The majority of open access articles are published in journals that charge fees. So the ones that don't charge fees are usually very small. They have a couple issues a year, a couple articles per issue. And it's not that difficult to run a very small journal with a small number of submissions and a small articles published on sort of purely voluntary basis. The problem is if you run a really good journal and you start getting hundreds of submissions in, then it starts becoming somebody's full-time job and you have to pay for that somehow. So while the idea of most open access journals don't charge is true, that doesn't represent the majority of the literature that actually gets published.
Now, one of the other misconceptions about open access is that open access journals are not peer-reviewed or not rigorously peer-reviewed. Can you talk to us about that? And as you're thinking about the question, there's an article that literally just hit my inbox yesterday from Retraction Watch here, and the title of it is "Journal, Publish Here, We'll Pay You $500. So this journal decided to start paying an author royalty fee, and it went so far as to say if you also join the editorial board, they'll bump it up to $600. So is this something you're familiar with? What are your feelings about the rigor of open access journals?
I'm not familiar with that particular journal, but let's start with rigor. So the issue is really separating out the idea of open access from the idea of the mega journal. So the mega journal, the idea behind the mega journal is we can't really predict all that accurately what's going to be important, what research is necessarily going to be important. And well, I think we can predict fairly well, but the notion is we can't say in advance this paper is going to be more important than this paper.
Or more highly cited
right,
or downloaded.
Exactly, or just have a bigger impact on the field. So the idea behind the mega journalists is let's just publish everything that's valid. So we're not going to review your paper for importance or significance or even novelty. Is this new or is this something someone else has already done?
It's adding to the literature.
Right. It's just we're just going to review it for accuracy. Is it methodologically sound? Did you do what you said you did? Are your conclusions supported by the data you are presenting? And that is it as far as if you do that, then you're accepted. And so you have these mega journals that publish 30,000 articles a year. They offer very fast, rapid publication, which people like. They accept almost everything that gets sent in. 50, 70% acceptance rates. They become very popular for publishers because they make enormous amounts of money. If you're publishing $30,000 and charging anywhere between $1,500 and $5,000 a year, you can do the math yourself. That's a lot of money coming in.
That's good living.
They have their problems, though, is you end up with this very large undifferentiated bucket of research, some of which is really good and some of which is mediocre at best. I think there are also problems because they are so large they become very distributed systems. So instead of having one editor, the buck stops with this editor-in-chief.
Sure.
They end up having 5,000 editors, and quantities of paper are sent out to each of them, and the quality of work they do varies considerably. Some editors do incredibly rigorous, wonderful jobs. Some editors publish papers from their friends. So that's a big problem, but that needs to be separated from open access as a whole, because there are some wonderful open access journals that have extremely high standards, really that are at the top. eLife and Biology eLife, PLOS Medicine, the OFID, the Open Forum Infectious Diseases, are all, we just launched a new one, Innovation and Aging with Gerontological Society, that the society has said, this is not an also-ran journal. This has our society's name on it. This journal is held to the same high standards as our other journals. Their other journals are doing great, but they've all gone up in their impact factor. They're all now rejecting 80–90% of what comes in. Well, we want to provide another forum for our authors who are shut out of our journals.
Sure.
And they're really, it's interesting. They're really trying to push sort of research that combines a lot of different, that works across boundaries of multidisciplinary research, and that's a real focus for the journal. But they have said this is not a junk journal. This is held to the same high standards of our other journal. If our name is on it, then we are backing it to the same thing, and that's something you can certainly do.
And that cascade approach,
Yes.
what you're describing, I think, is a pretty typical model.
Yes.
That journals that do have a high rejection rate will offer that option to
Yes.
authors to keep it under the same brand.
Yeah, and they don't. It's not every article we reject we're sending along to this other journal. What we've said certainly with these journals is, there's the absolute cream of the crop that you're going to accept, and then there's still some percentage after that that's really good work that's that borderline of I wish I could accept this journal, but we just don't have room for it, and that's the kind of thing we want to send along. That, and when work comes in that's out of scope for the original journal but is really good work, we'll send that along. I think the one downside of the selective open access journal is if you accept everything, you can charge less money because every paper that comes in pays you a fee. Whereas if you're rejecting 60–70% of what comes in, the papers you accept have to pay for the work you're doing to reject those articles, so the fees end up being a little higher. And generally, you see almost a direct correlation between impact factor and APC rate, that the better rated journals charge more.
Right.
To pay for all that rejection.
So, very interesting. And to summarize, where do you think open access is headed next? What should we be looking out for?
I think we're going to see I talked a little bit earlier about this sort of broadening of models and broadening of ideas. I think the existing models will continue to grow. I think they work well for fields, particularly gold open access works well for fields that are fairly well funded. It does what it's supposed to do. If you look at articles that are made freely available, they get read by more people. That's what we want. I mean, that's why that's why we publish things. That's why you publish things. Is we want this information out there. We want to make the world a better place and people to have more information and patients to get taken care of better. So the point is that open access actually works and makes that happen. The question is, how can we effectively publish that? How can we pay for that? Basically, if we're making everything free. So fields where there is a reasonable amount of funding, gold open access works really well for. I think we'll continue to see growth in that. A lot of funding agencies are driving for that. We're seeing a lot of countries, the Netherlands, Germany, are saying everything our authors publish needs to be gold open access.
Sure, like the URC UK and the UK, Wellcome Trust, it's a requirement of public funding.
Right, so they're now looking for these sort of large subscription deals that include APCs. So we're in negotiations with all of them. We're trying to figure out how do we exactly make that work.
Yeah,
But I think you'll start seeing you're seeing some broad that you're going to see continued growth in green open access, which the U.S. Funding policy, everything has to be freely available after 12 months. I think that's seen really broad acceptance across the globe. That's worked well for basically funding agencies who don't want to put any more money into the system. Of like, we want the stuff out there, but we don't want to pay a little more for it. We want journals to keep working. That's fine for us. And then we're starting to see some new models of sort of libraries banding together and saying, we'll all contribute a certain amount of money to this, and then the papers will be freely available. Or a funding agency saying, well, we're going to start our own journal, or things like that. So I think there's a lot of experimentation going on, which is really interesting. So I think it's basically a growth area. It's a way to better fulfill our mission where we can, and it's a way to find new ways to serve the community better. So I think we're going to see positive growth and uptake in a lot of different areas.
Well, it's been very enlightening. We appreciate your time, and if it's okay, we'll check back with you and we'll invite you back on the series. Thank you so much.
Please do.